Hello, everyone. Thank you for giving your time by attending this evening. Your microphone has been muted for privacy, and we do ask that you just keep yourself off of video for tonight's presentation. We will be recording the event, but we will stop recording for the discussion and conversation, which at that point you're more than welcome to unmute and turn your video back on. We want to ensure that you feel safe and supported here this evening, so please note the crisis line available through our chat line, our chat feature, and also on our screen in front of you. Oh, sorry, would you mind going back to that slide for me, Christina? Thank you. There's also the NEDIC helpline that is available for you all. I will also be posting that in the chat for you so that you'll have access to this line either this evening or in future. So next I'd like to explain the chat feature. So we can chat while the presentation is happening. The chat moderators this evening will be myself, Maria Rosa, and Ari. So if there is a question for the panel or a comment, something you'd like to share, please send it to Ari. And if it's something more related to Halton Families for Families, then you can send it to myself. If that's confusing, don't worry. Ari and I will be working together to ensure that your comment or question is definitely acknowledged, especially near the end when we will be opening up the presentation for more live chat. So this is just to get us through the point where our presenters and panelists will be chatting. So I wanted to also mention that we have two co-facilitators this evening. I will introduce them. They are volunteers. And before we begin full into the evening, I'd like to take a moment for our land acknowledgement. Take a moment right now to allow yourself to fully arrive. Allow the dust to settle in your mind. Bring your attention to your body, your breath, this present moment. Inhale a deep breath and exhale slowly. You are here. Welcome. We would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. As settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. In particular, we acknowledge the traditional territory of the Neutral, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe peoples. We recognize and deeply appreciate their historic connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions the Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made, both in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, and our province and country as a whole. Thank you for screen sharing for me, Christina. Now I would like to introduce Mona, who is our volunteer, and she will be leading us into our conversation. Take it away, Mona.
Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you for registering for this workshop with us this evening. My name is Mona, and I'm a volunteer with Halton Families for Families. As some of you may know, Halton Families for Families is a community collaborative that is here to support you and your family. We're volunteer parents and caregivers who partner with community organizations to organize events, workshops, and socials where you can connect with other families and feel supported and comfortable as a family. Please also feel free to check out our website at www.haltonfamiliesforfamilies.com. I'd like to introduce our workshop tonight, Finding the Balance, Navigating Conversations Around Healthy Eating and Exercise. Joining us this evening is a panel of guests, Ari, Erica, Tria, Sarah, and Candace. Ari Maharaj is a registered psychotherapist qualifying and a graduate of the University of Toronto's Master of Education in Counseling and Psychotherapy program. He currently works as NEDIC's Outreach and Education Coordinator, where he strives to take a preventative, proactive approach to helping people with their relationship with food and weight, while buffering them from developing an eating disorder. Erica, she's lived experience with an eating disorder and was able to achieve recovery through a combination of clinical and community supports. She's passionate about creating programs and services that will meet folks where they're at, those who are at risk of developing an eating disorder, struggling with self-esteem, body image, negative self-talk, etc. As the coordinator at Danielle's place, Erica is dedicated to ensuring that the program continues to grow creatively and effectively in order to best serve the community. Tria Lowen is a peer support worker who specializes in parents with children diagnosed with eating disorders. Her journey into eating disorders began when her youngest daughter developed an eating disorder when she was 11. Tria walked with her daughter through the eating disorder journey. Once her daughter established a secure recovery road, Tria decided to give back and set up a monthly support group with the assistance of McMaster's Children's Hospital Eating Disorder Unit. Sarah Farrell is the chair of the NEDIC Advisory Board and active volunteer, helping to coordinate caregiver engagement strategies like these. She is a mental health advocate, having personally experienced the effects of an eating disorder through her daughter's illness. Candice Richardson is an active volunteer and direct client support worker at NEDIC. She is a mental health advocate, having personally experienced the effect of an eating disorder. We welcome our panel moderator, Ari, and we're very happy to have you join us for our workshop this evening. Please take it away.
Thanks, Mona, and thanks, Maria Rosa, and hi, everyone. My name's Ari, and I'm really thrilled to be partnering with Halton Families for Families and many of the folks here in this community for having this evening with all of you. And I'm going to give you a little bit of introduction to our panel before we get started, and then we'll talk about ways in which you can be engaged throughout the entire panel experience. So I want you to sit as you're taking this in and think about, how often have you heard people say, "You look great, have you lost weight?" Or, "Are you sure you want to eat that?" Or, "I don't know if that looks good on you." These comments are often well-meaning, but we want children to feel like they're able to trust their body, eat a variety of foods, and lead a happy and well life. We also know that we're all inundated with messages about how to properly feed and support our kids. Meanwhile, in schools and on social media, we know that appearance is the most common reason for childhood teasing, and across Canada, 30 to 34% of girls and 23 to 25% of boys presenting across clinical and non-clinical settings report disordered eating symptoms like dieting, excessive exercise, binge eating, weight control behaviors, and having our thoughts and feelings spiral when it comes to food, weight, and shape. At the National Eating Disorder Information Center, affectionately called NEDIC, we work as a registered Canadian charity that's been helping people across the country affected by eating disorders since 1985. We operate Canada's national toll-free helpline and instant chat program that Maria Rosa mentioned and is in the chat, which provides support, information, and referrals to people struggling with their food and relationship with food and weight, as well as the families, friends, and professionals who care for them. With a focus on eating disorder risk factors, we develop and deliver prevention-focused workshops to diverse audiences, such as yourself. By doing a parent evening like this today, we're really wanting to integrate this into regular community programming and create a space where all of you feel like you can safely and address your needs as carers, reduce the stigma that you might experience, and empower you with support that you can take home for yourself and your families. Our hope today is to have a conversation with you about navigating that balance around healthy messages, especially around food and exercise with the young people in our lives. The way tonight's going to work is we have some set questions that us as a panel have talked about that we think we'd like to address with all of you based on the topic of today. And then we're going to open up the floor to you as an audience. And so like Maria Rosa mentioned, please don't hesitate while the panel is ongoing. If you feel like you're hearing them talk and a question comes to your mind, don't hesitate to put it in the chat for everyone or to direct message that on Zoom to me. And I'm happy to make sure that your question is going to be heard. We're also going to have a way to have anonymous questions later on. And when we get to that part, we're going to turn off recording because we know that sometimes that might be tough for people wanting to share aspects of their story and their experience. And so when time comes to allow you to share questions anonymously, probably in around like 25, 30 minutes or so, we'll let you know that, and we'll let you know when recording is coming off as well. Anyone have questions in the chat on the way tonight's going to go? Or do people sort of feel okay about that? I'll wait a sec just to see. Okay. thank you for the thumbs up for those folks who are familiar with Zoom and using that. That's super helpful. So please don't hesitate to stop me at any time. Maria Rose and I both have the chat open, and we're happy to address your questions as we go. But I'll turn the conversation over to our panelists. And one thing that I'll really want you to know is our panelists have a couple of language guidelines in place for themselves. And this is really here not to shame or blame any kinds of experiences, but we want you to know that while we have some folks who will feel comfortable sharing aspects of their story, they don't necessarily have to disclose any specifics that they feel like they don't want to, or use any specific numbers or discuss details related to trauma. They're really not meant to shame any of these experiences, but make the spaces possible, as safe as possible for all panelists and audience members who may be at different places in their recovery. So we ask for you as an audience member to respect these guidelines too and abide by them while asking questions. And know that if we don't get to your question, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was a bad one. We maybe just didn't feel like it was appropriate for the scope of this convo today, or we'll be able to send you a resource by which you can ask that question there and receive the support that you need and deserve. For panelists, please know that if these questions, any of them, including the ones I asked, don't feel comfortable for you, you don't have to answer every question. So if you're unfamiliar with something or you don't feel like it, just don't hesitate to pass or move on, and I'll check with you as we go. Don't feel pressured in the moment. Panelists, that feel okay? Okay. So I guess to kick us off, one thing that I'd really like to know, and I feel like everyone in the audience would love to know, is why is it important that we're here today to talk about how health messages around food and exercise can impact children and families? What brought all of you here today to share your story? Whoever wants to go.
I can jump in. So hi everyone, I'm Erica. Just to give you a little background, I'm from Danielle's place. And I guess I first just want to say thank you so much for attending today. I want to recognize and you being here, and I think it's incredible that you've taken time and space this evening to have these open and honest conversations. But specifically with my role at Danielle's place, I have seen time and again, one of the best supports in a child's life is their carer or family member support system at home. And it's often folks in that role who know their child or youth better than anyone. They're someone they can trust, admire, look to when things feel hard and scary. So I think by just being here this evening and having these conversations, we continue to look at diet culture and language and resources in the community so that we can build our toolboxes, and so that you can hopefully leave here today feeling like you have some strategies for yourself and for your young person moving forward. So yeah, I think that's kind of why I think it's important this evening.
Thanks, Erica. We're lucky to have you. Sarah?
I'll pop in and say I am here because as a parent of somebody with an eating disorder, she has been dealing with it for 8 years now, which was kind of a shock when we actually looked at the timeline. It is something that is unrelenting. And there are many times when I wish I had listened to my gut instinct. And I want to be here to pass on the message that to every person who's looking after someone or worried about someone, you know your instincts, you know your child the best. And like Erica said, we're here to empower you with the tools so you can get the knowledge, the guidance, and the help that might be needed, or just the reassurance that things are okay.
Thanks, Sarah. We're happy to have you. Tria, Candace?
I'll jump in. Echoing Sarah, my daughter is in recovery, has been in recovery for a while. And so I'm happy to give back. But one of the things that I really stress is that people have somebody to be with, in the sense of either at a distance through Zoom or their own caring community around them. Is so important that you have that if your child is dealing with any sort of mental health challenge. but more so if they slide into an eating disorder or disordered eating. So I'm very grateful that everybody's here tonight and is taking an active interest in this, because it's a very heavy subject and it takes a lot of courage to come out, and I thank you so much.
I guess I'll rant it out here. So hi, I'm Candace, and I guess I'm the child, obviously not their child. My mom is upstairs, but went through much the same thing with me being the ill one. And I think I am really committed to prevention work, because as much as medicine and treatment are fantastic and they are there if you need it, I am a firm believer that prevention is the best medicine. And some of the strategies that you can use are things that are super, super simple and just things that you can build into your everyday, the way that you talk about language and food and things like that. And I think sometimes we forget how much power is in our language. And that can go both ways, in a negative, but also in a huge positive direction. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. And I'm excited to get to learn from all of you over the course of our time together today. And I guess to set the stage for our conversation today, the way in which we've navigated this panel is navigating the relationship people have with food and exercise and what health means for it. And I'm wondering from all of you in your own ways, and I know you're all wearing multiple hats through our conversation today, I'm wondering for you personally, or for you in community, or for your experience with loved ones, what can cause someone's relationship with food and exercise to go astray? When did you feel like you were walking that line and the line started to get blurred and you kind of felt like, I need to pause and I need to think about what's going on here? What was that line for all of you?
I could jump in and start. Ari, you've heard this before, but my daughter had very bad anxiety as a child, and my husband and I got her some treatment, and we thought we had done the right thing, and we thought we had taken care of it properly and appropriately and gotten her the help. And then we slowly started watching some things change, and we didn't trust our gut, and that was the hard part. There was a couple of moments where we noticed things were changing. Like one thing my daughter and I used to always do is we would go get cheese and we'd make a charcuterie tray, and it was a big family event. And one day she announced she wasn't going to eat cheese because she felt like she just wanted cheese out of her diet. And I was like, well, okay, it's kind of strange, but because it was such a big family thing. And then when she was in high school, she got into running. And there was one day when she went running, even though it was horrible weather. She had a ton of homework, and she had a coach who was very sympathetic and very understanding that people should rest when they need the rest, even if he's, said that this should be done. He was very supportive and understanding, and a very good holistic coach. I really believed in him. And those were the two red flags that always come to my mind. And it was after the second one that I really started looking at what was more closely at what was going on. In full and true in my background, I was a registered nurse. I had never been in eating disorders, but I knew what some red flags were. But I had taken her to my doctor over and over, and they had said to me, oh, no problem, no problem. So I think looking back, listening to your red flags, listening to your instinct, and being your child's advocate has got to be one of the biggest messages I would want to pass on to other people. Every story is unique. Every child is different, and every parent or caregiver knows their child the best and can be the best advocate for them.
Thanks, Sarah. Erica?
Yeah. So I'm going to speak just to my experience with Danielle's place in that kind of role. Mm-hmm. So for me, I think it's important to recognize that I don't think there's one specific cause of a challenging relationship with food and exercise. But in my experience and with the clients that I've worked with over the years, a lot of times we see an early engagement or introduction into diet culture in some capacity. So, and this can be kind of a flame, a starter to that challenging relationship with food and exercise. And so by engaging in like diet culture early, whether it's like restriction in some capacity, over exercise, or both, it can create a distrust of body, right? And it may even begin to solidify an outward or a value with outward appearance for food choice, exercise behaviors, and just placing really deep value on those things rather than, that youth and all of the amazing things that they can do. And we know, like, we have large conversations about this at Danielle's Place all the time, but the diet industry is $1 billion industry that preys on the failure of its consumer, right? And so for young people, diet culture is kind of everywhere. It masks itself. It's not always in your face. It's things like wellness accounts on Instagram, TikTok videos, what I eat in a day videos, photoshopped images, exercise accounts, right? And they have these things at their fingertips. So it's always kind of available to them. And so when I work with the young people at Danielle's Place, our response to these images and videos is not necessarily to get rid of social media altogether, but to become an agent of your feed, right? And so to be empowered to take control of the images that you're seeing, change the narrative, unfollow accounts that make you feel like you need to change in some capacity. I just think that young people have the power to change so much, but I think there's an issue with diet culture and how prevalent and sneaky it can be for our young people.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just for the audience, in case this is the first time you're hearing the term diet culture, it really is the culture word in there is really important. It's really this like system of images and beliefs and thoughts and feelings that really glorify having a certain kind of body, that some bodies are better than others. And our young people, and all of us even, frankly, are always exposed to images that we see on a daily basis or conversations that we might see on a daily basis. And sometimes they're from us, sometimes their loved ones and their peers and their family members ourselves who have to we're really maybe not sure sometimes when we're espousing that. And I like that Erica mentioned some the piece around feeling, like if your young person in your life is starting to feel different, they're on their phone all the time is something that's maybe kind of normal, especially now. But if they're starting to feel like they're disconnected or they're starting to feel like it's not so great, that's when I would start to be a little bit more worried. Shreya, Candice, you want in on this convo?
I think mine echoes what Sarah was saying quite a bit in that you know your child the best. My mom noticed a lot of the warning signs. Similarly, like I've been anxious since I came out of the womb, and it really got more and more aggressive throughout my childhood. And my mom noticed that, the anxiousness around food and skipping meals, and was really fighting with my pediatrician to get it noticed. And it was kind of brushed off time and time again. And my mom really, really had to advocate. And to the point when I finally got into treatment, it was already pretty far gone. And I really should have had a referral much earlier. And had my mom not been advocating for that, I didn't even know what would have happened. So I think you know your child the best. And if you're noticing these things, don't be afraid to get a second opinion. Don't be afraid to push harder. It's your family's health. That's the most important. And I think that was our experience. And I already was very much the textbook definition of anorexia. I grew up in competitive dance. I'm perfectionistic, anxious. I had all of those telltale signs and come from quite a bit of privilege, and it was still brushed off within our medical system. So I think that also speaks to the barriers that so many others can face. If that was our experience, having a certain level of privilege, what does that mean for somebody who perhaps there's a language barrier or a cultural barrier or anything else? So there are resources out there that are appropriate, but it's really getting to them that can be really tough. So don't be afraid to advocate for yourselves.
Thanks, Candice.
I'm coming at this in a little different way because my daughter didn't develop eating any body image issues until after she was admitted to hospital. We were the wholesome family. We didn't have a television. We talked very favorably about food. We ate well, and her anxiety led her down a different mode to eating disorders than through body image, or peer pressure for that matter. But once she was in the hospital and she saw television for the first time since she was little girl, she was amazed at the media messages that were coming at her like a fire hose. And she actually had a little slip of paper on her bedside table listing off or checking off the number of diet ads that she had seen, because she was so amazed by it. As she fought through her recovery, then body image issues developed, which was hard to take. But she has since moved beyond that by realizing, that she is who she is. Being able to be the mom and to see the warning signs with them incredibly. So those that are struggling with that know that it's okay, that maybe things have slid a little bit. There's always hope, and you need to get out there and advocate. And eventually the system will listen. It takes a while sometimes, but it will listen, and there's people out there that are willing to help.
Thanks, Tria. I'm wondering if we're starting to talk a bit about barriers, and we're hearing that the system sometimes isn't super favorable. And I had seen a comment in the chat where someone's already starting to mention shame being a really big thing in talking about this issue in particular. When you all think of the word advocacy and the ways in which you had to advocate, or your community agency has to advocate for clients, or from whatever aspect of your story, what comes to mind? What's been the most helpful for you, and a piece of advocacy that you'd like to share with our audience today, that's small and practical, that someone can take away with them if they feel like they're worried about a loved one who might be struggling?
I'd like to jump in on that. I worked with a mom whose daughter was being asked to leave treatment because they thought she was well, and the mom's gut said no, she wasn't. And the mom stuck to her guns. We did a lot of talking, she did a lot of planning, and she was able to get her daughter back into care and stayed there for another couple of years. So if you feel that you're not being listened to, keep going, believe in yourself, believe in that gut. Somebody will listen, but you just need to keep going.
I'd like to jump in and echo what Tay was saying, that you need to be an advocate. When I was taking my daughter to the doctor, and this doctor claimed that she had treated eating disorder patients. At one point, she looked at me and she said, well, just get her to go put on 5 pounds and come back in a month and check. And by this point, I had already known in my gut that she had an eating disorder. And I should have stood and screamed at her that if I could have gotten her to put on 5 pounds, I wouldn't be here in the first place. And it was at that point that things turned for me, and I went and I found the program, and then I had to get over my shame of having a child with an eating disorder, because it's a mental illness. And there's still that stigma of knowing somebody or looking after somebody who has a mental illness. But I would do anything for my daughter. I would do anything for my family. So it was very quick. I started talking to people. I got connected with Medic. Fortunately, I got connected with a lot of other groups. And through sharing with other parents, families, and learning, I was able to do it. The one thing I want to echo on what Tay was saying is that doctors have approximately 2 to 4 hours in 4 years of training, 2 to 4 hours on eating disorders. Quite often, they don't know about them. So you need to, if you think in your gut, you think there's something wrong, you think your child there's just something not right, you need to be vocal. And not every eating disorder person looks the same. They want to you know, just because you are in a small body doesn't mean you have an eating disorder, but just because you're in a larger body doesn't mean that you don't have an eating disorder. They can manifest themselves in many different ways. And as the parent, you know your child and you know when something's wrong, and you need to be very strong and be very vocal about your child and what they need and what you feel you're not getting. And it's hard. I left that doctor really quickly and found a great one who is amazing and helping my daughter still to this day.
Candace, Erica, anything you want to chime in? I think Tria and Sarah covered a lot, but anything on your minds?
Yeah, I think you both did such a lovely job at touching on the advocacy part. It's so important, and it often feels really challenging to navigate a system which is broken. So I love how you shared around like how important it is to advocate for your kiddo. I think for me, I just would say resource yourself to the nines. Like I just think that there's a lot of really great community programs, and like Danielle's Place, and like the group that Tria runs, and NEDIC has such great resources as well. It's just you know, there's lots of support out there. So just by the sheer fact of being here this evening, you have those connections now, and I think that's fabulous. I didn't say it as eloquently as Tria and Sarah, but I think just having resources around you, people you can trust and connect with and understand where you're coming from is really important.
In a community where we have like, so almost everyone has an opinion on food, weight, and shape, then one of the hardest things to do is to educate yourself on those topics. And there's a difference between educating yourself on a random website and educating yourself in a community setting like you all are here today, talking to folks, hearing different perspectives, talking to agencies that are trusted and funded in different ways. I think there's, just like how we hear about disinformation and misinformation all the time, it totally exists around this topic in spades. Candace?
Something I wanted to add, this wasn't necessarily my experience, as I did meet kind of the clinical criteria for anorexia, but that might not always be the case. Like sometimes people get very caught up in the DSM-5 and the ICD-10, which are the diagnostic criteria that we use within the mental health and healthcare systems. And clinicians especially tend to get very caught up in those because it has to do with funding and all these other things. But what it boils down to is if you feel there is something wrong, and if there is extreme distress around food, weight, shape, etc., that's a problem. Point blank, period. It doesn't matter if you meet 0.37 and 9, but not 10, and 8 part 2 beat, whatever. If there is issues that are interfering with people's lives, that's something that deserves attention, support, and to be addressed, regardless of what the DSM says. And I think that that's something that we have to at NEDIC a lot on the helpline, like really help people advocate for, because I think sometimes, while I completely understand why we have set criteria for things, and it makes sense to a certain extent, I think sometimes people fall through the cracks, and that might also be partially because eating disorders thrive in secrecy. So it's not uncommon that folks don't share the whole truth when they're describing what they're experiencing. So yeah, that's just something to be mindful of. Like, you deserve support if this is a problem, even if people are trying to tell you that this isn't a problem.
Thanks, Candace. Super important to share that. And I'm wondering, and I'm going to work in a question in the chat here a little early, because it's also something I think we all wanted to talk about at some point. What was the tipping point for all of you in your own ways? For Erica, like for the youth that you see and serve, like what are some tipping points that you've noticed? For Tria, tipping points that you've noticed, Sarah, Candace? Like I think we all know, and just to set context for this question, that the tipping points can really vary for different folks, but I think it's still valuable to share a little bit about what you four have seen, just to give a story to that experience, if you feel comfortable sharing.
I think.
Nope. Yep. You go first.
Sorry about that.
We'll go Tria, Candace, Sarah. Go for it.
Okay. I can give an aggregate review from the different families that I've worked with over the years, including my daughter. And what I've seen time and time again is that there's been a value that's been identified. So, or a goal. I want to go to university, or I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a nurse. And when it comes down to the realization that, yes, I want to do this, but I cannot carry on with my behaviors and this eating disorder and achieve that goal. And there's that seismic shift that happens. With my daughter, it came with an evening where she couldn't eat dinner. We talked through it. She got angry and she said, I want to get on with my life. I want to go to university. I want to get well. And it wasn't easy, but she'd made up her mind and she did it. And I've seen that repeatedly over the years, working with other families whenever there's been a goal or something that they want to achieve. And that's much more important than what the eating disorder is.
I've heard similarly, like when young people themselves ask themselves the question of like, just imagine a life where your like thoughts and feelings and stuff just aren't caught up in this, what you could do with that life, you know? Like it's like, sometimes you can't even imagine that freedom sometimes when you're stuck in it. And I'm seeing some questions in the chat of people who are really feeling stuck in it at the moment. I'll go Candace, then Sarah.
Yeah, I think that was a huge thing for me, like wanting to, you know, accomplish things. And it's not like that's kind of tough too, because a lot of the times folks with eating disorders tend to be pretty high achieving people. So sometimes they are still accomplishing things and really doing well despite being quite severely ill in some cases. So I think that is a scenario in which it can be quite difficult, because there's not that, oh, you can't do this and that, because they're like, well, I can, I'll show you. Which that was me, until there came a point when I was like, this isn't worth it. Like, and I think too, or at least I got so caught up in my own little world in my head that was happening that I wasn't realizing the effect that I was having on other people. Not to like a negative, like that I was doing anything negative toward them, but just the behaviors I was engaging in through having an eating disorder and what effect that was having on my family and my friends and things like that. And I remember like one of my little cousins who was like 10 at the time being like, I want to be skinny like Candace when I grow up. And I was like, okay, we are going to 180 this here. And so it's not like things magically get easier after that tipping point and that like, oh, we're cured, but it changes your mindset. So you're better able to take those active steps that before you were just like, I don't want to do that. I can't do that. There's just a shift that happens that's like, no, I'm going against this. Yeah.
Thanks, Candace. Sarah?
I was going to say, it's hard for me to answer this one because my daughter is not recovered yet. She has been in and out of treatment for 8 years now. I have seen a shift lately, like Candace was talking about, that she's seen what this eating disorder has taken away from her, and she knows where she wants to go, and she's trying. We'll see where it goes. It's been a long process, and there hasn't been a magic tipping point. I wish there would have been. It would have been a lot easier, and this would be an issue that we'd have to talk about. So I'm sorry I can't answer more clearly.
I think what you're sharing is also like a really real experience for a lot of people too, that this is messy, right? Like, I think there are tipping points, and I think it's like the bottom part of the roller coaster, but the roller coaster still goes back up every now and then too. And like a lot of it is just wavy, wavy, wavy. And so I appreciate you sharing that, Sarah. Erica?
Yeah, kind of similar to Sarah, I don't have, the way that Danielle's place operates is more from a prevention lens. So I don't often see the other side of things, but for me personally, during my experience, it was more around like, there was a lot of shame and isolation, and that was really lonely. And Candace, you said something around like, how I was treating other people in my life, and you don't even realize it because you're so caught up in your own stuff. But for me, it was finding, not necessarily a medical community or even like a therapist. It was like peers that like just I could talk to someone that understood my story, and we could have like open and honest conversations about the big things that were going on. And it was just such a relieving experience for me. And then from that point forward, I just kind of kept moving. Knowing that I wasn't alone for me was huge. It was so helpful, because I think a lot of, especially when I think of the young people that I work with, it often feels really like, they're alone and they're going through this big scary thing all by themselves. And so, yeah, I think just having others to talk to informally, I think, especially for young people, I think medical supports and therapist supports are absolutely beneficial to recovery. I think it's fantastic. But there's also so much benefit in like that, just that informal conversation and being open and honest about what's going on. So yeah, that's kind of how I thought of that question.
Cool. Thanks all for sharing that. And I'm wondering, we are getting flooded in the chat with lots of questions. And I wonder, Maria Rosa, if this feels like an okay time to maybe turn recording off. For those folks who, just in case if you're watching this recording, know that the Halton Families for Families host folks are putting together a resource page, because we haven't explicitly talked about resources yet fully. And so just know, if you're watching this, that there will be this, and to go through Halton Families for Families to get that. But I think it might be a good time to turn off recording and we can get a little more intimate as we go. Does that sound okay?
That's perfect.